About 9 or 10 years ago, I got a job as a stock clerk in a large warehouse on the outskirts of the city. That's where I met Kayla, a 29-year-old woman who worked with me in the textiles department. We weren't close friends, but we got along well, and I really enjoyed spending the afternoons with her when things were slower. Kayla had a very friendly demeanor and a great sense of humor, which made our conversations always pleasant. She was Colombian and had moved to the United States with her 7-year-old son. Her entire family still lived in Colombia. As a single mother, Kayla was very dedicated to her work. She was usually the first to arrive and the last to leave. In the 2 years she had worked at the warehouse, she had never missed a single day. That's why I found it very strange when I arrived that morning and didn't see her. I asked a colleague if she had any news about her, and she said she had seen her the day before. Then I went to ask our supervisor if Kayla had given any explanation for her absence, but the answer was negative. She simply didn't show up. Although that intrigued me, I didn't give it much thought at the time. It was just a curiosity. After all, Kayla and I weren't that close, and there was a lot about her life that I didn't know. It could have been an issue with her son or something like that. However, the next day she didn't show up again, and the same thing happened the day after that, and the next. 4 days had passed, and no one knew where Kayla was. I didn't know where she lived. I only had her cell phone number, and I tried calling several times, but there was no answer. A few days later, I noticed several colleagues gathered around another co-worker who was showing something on her phone. Curious, I approached to see what it was, and it was a video of Kayla. In the video, she appeared extremely nervous, frightened. The recording was made while she was driving. The phone was propped up on the dashboard, and she began speaking in a rushed manner. I just drove through one of the most deserted parts of the road and saw a black van parked, half hidden in the wooded area nearby. I looked out of curiosity and saw 2 men taking black garbage bags out and transferring them to what seemed like another vehicle behind the van. She continued, visibly shaken. That's when one of the bags ripped open and human parts fell out. At first they looked like pieces of meat, but I quickly realized they were arms, legs, and even heads. She was completely terrified, in a total state of panic. The colleague showing the video said Kayla had sent it to her privately via Facebook chat, but she only saw it that morning since she rarely checked her Facebook messages. She also mentioned that the last time Kayla had been online was about 3 hours after sending the video. But that wasn't all. This friend, who was very close to Kayla, said she had sent several messages but never received a response. Worried on the second day that Kayla missed work, she went to her house but found no one there. She asked the neighbor next door if she had seen Kayla, and the neighbor said, "Yes, about 2 days ago, Kayla and her 7-year-old son left in a black truck, the kind used for transportation, and they haven't returned since." Hearing this, of course, we were all concerned and reported Kayla and her son's disappearance to the authorities, as she had no family here. So, apart from the neighbor and us, her co-workers, no one else had noticed her absence. 2 days later, a garbage collector found the dismembered remains of a young woman with dark hair inside a black bag dumped in one of the dumpsters near the warehouse. He immediately called the police, who came to the scene to collect the remains. Later, forensic analysis confirmed that it was Kayla. When my colleagues and I found out, we were utterly horrified. It was a terrible tragedy, something we could never have imagined happening to someone so close. But we all wondered the same thing. Where was her son? The neighbor had seen them leave together. My colleague decided to post Kayla's last video on Facebook. We felt people needed to know what had possibly happened, and maybe someone could have a lead on who was responsible. The next day, when I arrived at work, that same colleague called me over to show something on her phone. Several people were already gathered around, and she showed me some comments on the video, but 2 in particular stood out. One said, "Poor woman. She found the dismemberers from the dark web, saw what she shouldn't have. It was obvious they would go after her." And the other, even more frightening, said, "I hope she didn't have children or family, because they'll probably do the same to them, or maybe they already have. And for sure, all the videos are already on the dark web." That last message had around 250 replies, and I read every single one. What I discovered through those responses is something that will haunt me forever. It turns out that what my friend had seen that day was probably one of the transport units serving the mafias that operate on the dark web. According to what people were saying, these vehicles make rounds through major cities in the country, collecting bodies of people who had been sold in auctions on the dark web. Until then, I had never heard of such a thing, but from what I could gather by reading all the comments, there were extremely wealthy and powerful people who bought other people, mostly women and children, through this dark network, using them for their own twisted pleasures. They were treated as if they were worthless pieces of meat, and no one cared because, as the comments suggested, these victims were kidnapped and sold as commodities. In some cases, children were even sold by their own parents to these criminal networks. All of this affected me so deeply that I ended up reading over 100 comments and replies, organizing them to see the most recent ones. Some people were already reporting that the woman in the video, my co-worker, had been found in the conditions I mentioned. However, these comments were quickly deleted, but my friend who posted the video assured me she wasn't the one removing them. Another strange thing was that this didn't make the news, even though the police had collected and analyzed the remains. Also, the video had been shown to them first. The most disturbing part of all is that, as horrible and painful as what happened to my colleague was, at least we knew what happened to her. But what was never discovered was the whereabouts of her son. This happened to me when I was 17. At that time, all this deep web stuff was just starting to gain attention. I was in my senior year of high school. The first time I heard someone talk about this dark web was through a classmate named Thomas. He was only 16, but he was already seen as a potential hacker. On several occasions I heard him comment about the subject, but I never paid much attention until sometime later when the topic became more popular. That's when my curiosity was piqued, and I decided to ask him about it. Thomas explained that you couldn't access this dark web without a specific link. Something like someone from there had to give you access, or at least that's what I understood at the time. So I asked him if he knew how to get into the deep web and if he had ever done it before. He gave a quick glance around and said, "Yeah, I can send you the link as soon as I get home." That day I remember feeling anxious, waiting for my friend to send me the link. I was really curious to discover what I might find there. The first things that came to my mind were confidential files, topics about extraterrestrials, conspiracy theories and things like that. But what I ended up finding was quite different from that. It was around 8 p.m. when my friend finally sent me the access link. As soon as I opened it, a kind of search engine appeared on the screen. I didn't even know how to use it properly. However, I noticed there were several categories on the right side of the page. I don't know if that's common or if it was something specific to the site he recommended. One of the links caught my attention right away because it was related to exotic foods. I clicked on it, and the page opened with a video of a chef about to prepare a dish. I saw several ingredients on the table, many of which we use regularly in the kitchen. Another thing that really grabbed my attention was the number of people watching the video. I found it kind of weird because, I don't know, I thought I was the only crazy person who would enter the deep web to watch a guy cooking, but from what I could see, there were almost 2,000 people connected. For a moment I thought about leaving, but the chef was very charismatic and seemed excited about the dish he was going to make. Besides, I was too curious to know what the main ingredient would be, since there were only side ingredients on the table. The man spent some time chopping onions, celery, and other vegetables, but you could tell from the comments that people were anxious for him to reveal the main ingredient. There was a kind of collective anticipation about what he was going to cook. That's when something occurred to me and I thought, I know. It must be some exotic animal like an opossum or a snake. That's what I expected to see, honestly. But when the moment of the chef's big reveal arrived, I nearly had a heart attack. When he opened the huge refrigerator in the kitchen, what he pulled out is something I will never be able to erase from my memory. To my horror, it was a human leg, a man's leg, complete, including the foot. I jumped out of my chair and covered my mouth with my hands as I watched that guy laughing and making jokes while cutting the leg and placing it in the boiling pot along with the other ingredients. Then I moved closer to read the comments and people seemed euphoric about what he was preparing. I stared at the screen, trying to find some trick, thinking maybe it was a joke, that this was some kind of prop, but it wasn't. It was real human flesh, a real leg. When I realized that, I left immediately, closed the laptop, and called my friend, furious, cursing him out as a sick freak. I told him what I had just seen and how traumatized I was, and the bastard just laughed at me. Since that day, I never dared to enter that place again. I deleted the link from my computer, and I swear, if that had popped up again, I would have set the machine on fire. That was the moment I understood that the world is full of morbid and deeply disturbed people, as my friend later explained that all the dishes that Chef made were for sale, which explained the comments I saw saying things like, "Can't wait to receive my order." Since then, thanks to my damned curiosity, that image of the human leg haunts me in my nightmares. When this happened, I was a somewhat naive 20-year-old, totally addicted to online games. At the time, my laptop had broken down, so I ended up borrowing my older brother's, without asking, of course. While searching for my favorite gaming sites, I stumbled upon a page full of games that seemed pretty fun, so I decided to try a few. This was before I even knew what Facebook was. Many of these sites were riddled with flaws, and honestly, the security options weren't the best. So messing with anything there was practically inviting viruses and malware onto the computer. But, like I said, I was a bit naive. One day, bored, I decided to take my brother's laptop again and start hunting for more gaming sites. I typed into the search bar, "fun games, nothing boring or shooting games." I began browsing the options, but almost all of them were sites I had visited before. Then, suddenly, a pop-up appeared in the top right corner of the screen with the words, "Death Games." It was a weird ad that appeared out of nowhere. Back then, it wasn't uncommon to see these ads randomly pop up while browsing, but this one caught my attention for some reason. And since I've always had a bit of a morbid curiosity, I clicked on it. For a moment, the screen went completely blank. I couldn't see anything. Then, suddenly, the screen lit up with a message. "Hello, do you want to see someone die?" Click the send button to continue. The letters were written in red and looked like they were dripping down the screen. I almost cried from laughing. The sight was so cheesy. But since I was already there, I continued. I stared at the screen for a moment and then the send button started flashing. The words changed, now saying, "What's the matter? Are you scared? Don't be a coward. It's just a game. Go ahead, click the button now." I sighed deeply and clicked, expecting to find yet another lame game. And at first glance, it looked like I had hit the mark. What appeared on the screen looked like a poorly made caricature. There were 3 crudely drawn characters. They reminded me of Peppa Pig characters, but in a human and somewhat creepy version. 2 were men, the other, a woman. The men were dressed like those cartoonish bank robbers we see in animated shows, with thief masks and black and white striped shirts. The woman was sitting in a chair, overly animated to look terrified, trembling, whimpering, and seemingly in complete terror. One of the men, who was on the left, looked directly at me, and I swear he really looked at me and smiled and asked, "Do you want to see her die?" His voice was strange, as if disguised with some sort of modulator. After that question, 2 options appeared on the screen, yes or no. I stood still for a moment, trying to make sense of this bizarre situation, but then the man spoke again, this time sounding a bit annoyed. "Look, you clicked the link. I know you want to see what comes next. Go on, it's just a game. Click the button." I thought for a second, but in the end I decided, screw it, and clicked the yes button without thinking much about it. Right after that, the other guy went to the back of the scene, put on a butcher's apron, and returned to the action. Everything was still animated. It was those caricatures doing everything. The guy in the butcher's apron was now standing next to an operating table with tools in hand. What happened next still gives me chills. The man began using a metal saw, and the sound was incredibly real, as were the woman's screams, which, along with the altered narrator's voice, seemed genuinely terrifying. The animation was grotesque, to say the least. The guy started cutting the woman alive with the saw, tossing her body parts aside one by one, and eventually did the same with her head. As he did this, the sounds were so realistic that they made me feel sick. Her blood-curdling screams, the sound of the saw cutting through bone and flesh, the gurgling noises and the agonizing groans until everything finally went silent. I almost laughed at how good the sound effects were, in contrast to the animation, which was complete trash. However, I felt a bit uneasy because the woman's terrified screams sounded so real that they gave me chills. Did you enjoy that? I knew you were curious. Want to see something even better? I clicked yes again, and another animation began. This time, it was the same two men, but now in scuba gear, and the third figure was no longer a woman, but a man in a business suit, standing by the edge of a large lake. The man in the suit had his hands tied behind his back. The guy on the left held up a sign that read, "Do you want to see him die?" I hesitated again, but eventually clicked yes. Then the other diver grabbed the guy by the ankles and began dragging him towards the water. The man screamed like crazy, trying to break free and begging for his life. Just like in the previous animation, the sound effects were absurdly realistic. You could hear every detail, even the most subtle sounds. In the end, the diver lifted the man and threw him into the water with a splash that drowned out his terrified screams. I couldn't believe that even this sound was so realistic. For about 30 seconds, nothing happened, but suddenly the man in the suit reappeared on the surface, still screaming like crazy. I could barely see what was behind him, pulling him down. A minute later, he resurfaced, but he wasn't screaming anymore. Now his arms were gone, and red lines made it seem like they had been torn from his shoulders, as if they had gone through a giant blender. Suddenly, what had pulled him under appeared. It was a massive crocodile that grabbed him by the side and dragged him down, never to resurface again. I started feeling really sick from these demented animations. It wasn't funny anymore. I just wanted to get off the site and never come back. But then the screen changed again. Now the two men weren't drawings anymore. They were real people in some kind of grey room, but with white masks. Near them was the completely dismembered body of a woman, and one of them was holding a hanger with the remains of a business suit all torn up and dripping with red-stained water. That disguised voice said again, "Wasn't it fun watching those two? You wanted to see more, and we did that for you, but they had to go through the experience, and you can too. Please don't leave the site. You'd ruin all the fun." That's when the fear really hit me. I was completely frozen in my chair, sweating cold. Suddenly, I realized in horror that those animations were just a cover for real crimes. The murders had been recorded and turned into ridiculous drawings to hide what had actually happened. That's when three options appeared on the screen. One said, "Yes, I want to experience it." Another, "No, I don't want to experience it." And the third, "I want to meet you." Of course, I clicked no, but nothing happened. Was it a threat? What's wrong with you? Don't you want to have fun? You had an amazing experience, you saw us do what we did, and you still chose no. You better make the right choice this time. Now I was starting to hyperventilate. My breathing became erratic, my heart was racing. I felt a pit in my stomach and almost lost the feeling in my fingers. I was in a full-blown panic. I clicked no again, pressing the button several times as fast as I could until I finally managed to close the site. I swear I thought I was going to have a heart attack right then and there. Mustering the last bit of courage I had left, I went to check the history, but the site had simply disappeared, as if it had never existed. A few minutes later, my brother arrived and caught me using his computer. I looked at him, still in a panic, and he asked what I had been doing. So, I told him everything that had just happened. He immediately pushed me away from the computer, did something on it that I didn't understand, and then turned it off. He scolded me for using his computer without permission, and explained that what I had seen wasn't just any page, but something from the dark web. Honestly, I don't understand much about these things. All I knew was that my brother had a computer that allowed access to the deep web. He studied computer science and knew about that sort of thing. He said he had blocked the site using some code and that he now needed to ensure the computer hadn't been hacked. Still shaken, I asked if what I had seen was real, and he confirmed that it was, and that those were very dangerous people. I said we should call the police, but he immediately shut down the idea, saying that in this case, we would be putting ourselves in real danger. That made me even more worried, but he just led me out of the room and assured me he would take care of everything. In the end, I never knew exactly what he did, who he talked to, or how he resolved it. All I know is that the next day I asked about it, and he told me not to worry, that everything was already taken care of. At the end of 1998, the year France won its first World Cup and the Euro was born, I had one of the strangest experiences of my life at the age of 15. There I was, sitting at my parents' old computer trying to use that ridiculously slow internet from back then. I was researching Franco's dictatorship for a school project when my friend Nolan messaged me on IRC. "Hey, a guy from school told me about something really cool you can do on the computer," he said. "Really? What is it?" I asked. "First, open Start, then click on Run, and finally type this link and let me know when you've done it." He gave me the address, and I followed his instructions. Suddenly, a window full of commands appeared. There were 2 text fields and a common command line. I messaged Nolan when I finished, and he guided me. In one field, put your name, in the other, a password, and in the last line, type Gate 2 Artil. I did exactly as he said, and soon a screen appeared asking me to choose a nickname. I put no name, which means without a name in English. I thought it was funny. Then the window closed, and shortly after a file popped up with the message, "Welcome to the Artil chat room of Oregon. User no name has entered." For the next few months, I spent my time exchanging messages with my friends in that chat room. I never knew who created it or how it actually worked. From what I understood, this room only worked in the Oregon region, so theoretically, anyone from there could join. In practice, though, it was just me, Nolan, and a few other people. There was also a guy from school who lived on the other side of town, and once someone showed up claiming to work in tech support for an insurance company, but they quickly left when someone asked, "What school do you go to?" I never understood why we used this chat room instead of a regular one. Maybe it was the appeal of feeling like it was something secret, underground. Then, one autumn morning, I was caught by surprise. Someone made me the room's administrator. I had no idea who did it, but I felt important and bragged to my friends for days. I could even change what others wrote, making it look like they were saying nonsense, although honestly, I barely used these powers because I didn't really know how. Until one day I logged in and saw that the admin messages weren't empty as usual. I wish I had never looked. The story was long and disturbing, written in several short messages by a user named Laura6754. She recounted how her parents mistreated her, didn't let her leave the house, and how she would hide to connect to the internet. That night, Laura6754 told us that she had seen the chat room open on her father's computer and that she was going to tell whoever she could. I asked who she was and said that if it were true, she would have called the police already. But suddenly, the chat room froze. I tried to log back in, but every time I used the run command, I got an error. I was furious. Our secret hideout with Nolan had disappeared. 2 days later, while watching the news, I heard the following. 16-year-old girl murdered by her father while trying to escape through her bedroom window. The mother is in custody, but the father is on the run. The most disturbing thing was that the police found on the family's computer descriptions of some boys named Nolan No Name and 2 others, where the father wrote about how he imagined these boys and the horrible things he would do to them if he ever found them. The details were indescribable. This man was never caught. As far as I know, he's still out there hiding among us. I don't think they'll ever find him, but I'm immensely relieved that he didn't find us.